At 58 years old, after 33 years of marriage, Marilyn Foster walked out of a county courthouse carrying a cardboard box, a rusted pickup truck key, and the deed to her late father's abandoned gas station on a forgotten mountain highway. It was the only thing Gregory Hale's lawyers hadn't bothered fighting for. Gregory kept the house. He kept the savings. He kept the retirement accounts. He even kept the woman he had been seeing behind Marilyn's back for years. Marilyn left with $211 in her checking account and nowhere to go. 4 hours later, she drove deep into the mountains of Pinecrest County, intending to sell the property her father had left behind and start over somewhere else. But behind the dusty counter of Foster Ridge Service Station, hidden inside a secret compartment she never knew existed, Marilyn discovered something Walter Foster had spent 40 years quietly building. A legacy, a secret, a record of hundreds of lives changed by one ordinary man. The entire valley remembered what Walter Foster had done. The only person who never knew was his own daughter. And before the week was over, Marilyn would discover that the station everyone considered worthless might be the most valuable thing she had ever owned. The courtroom smelled like old paper, floor polish, and disappointment. Marilyn sat quietly while the judge reviewed the final settlement agreement. She barely listened anymore. The words had lost their meaning weeks ago. Property division, retirement accounts, investment holdings, marital assets. Everything that had once represented 33 years of marriage now existed as lines of legal text. Gregory wasn't even there. He had sent his attorney instead. Marilyn signed where she was told to sign. 4 signatures, 2 initials, and just like that, her marriage ended. Outside, late afternoon sunlight reflected off the courthouse windows. She placed her cardboard box in the bed of the rusted pickup truck Gregory had generously allowed her to keep. Inside the box sat a chipped coffee mug, a family photo album, her mother's jewelry box, and a few personal belongings. 33 years of marriage fit into a cardboard box. Marilyn sat behind the wheel and stared through the windshield. For the first time in her adult life, she had no plan, no home, no husband, no future she could see. Her eyes drifted toward the manila folder resting on the passenger seat. Inside was the deed. Foster Ridge Service Station, Highway 47, Pinecrest County. Her father had left it to her 12 years earlier. She had visited after the funeral, locked the door when she finished sorting through his belongings, and never returned. Gregory had called the property worthless. At the time, she had agreed. Now it was all she had. The truck engine started on the 3rd attempt. Marilyn pulled onto the highway and headed toward the mountains. Hours passed. The city disappeared behind her. Suburbs gave way to farmland. Farmland gave way to forests. The road climbed steadily into the Blue Ridge foothills. Golden leaves fluttered across the pavement. The air grew cooler. By sunset, she reached Highway 47. The old station appeared around a curve in the road exactly where memory said it would be. Smaller than she remembered. Older, too. The pumps stood rusted and silent. Vines covered part of the building. One window was cracked. The hand-painted sign above the entrance had faded almost beyond recognition. Yet somehow the place still stood, waiting. Marilyn climbed from the truck and approached the front door. The second key on the ring fit the lock. The door opened with a reluctant groan. Dust floated through the fading sunlight. Inside, everything remained exactly where Walter had left it. The counter, the shelves, the old register, and beside it sat a pair of wire-rimmed reading glasses. Next to them rested an unfinished crossword puzzle. Marilyn slowly picked up the glasses. For a moment she could almost hear her father's voice. Then her fingers brushed against something unusual beneath the counter. A narrow seam, hidden in the wooden paneling. She knelt. Curiosity replaced exhaustion. Carefully, she slid her fingers into the gap and pulled. The panel moved. Behind it waited a hidden compartment, and inside sat a worn leather journal. Marilyn stared at it as darkness gathered outside the station windows. Then she opened the cover and read the first line. March 12, 1982. Lent Arthur Bishop $200 so his family could keep the lights on. Marilyn frowned. She had no idea what she was looking at, but she knew one thing. She wasn't selling the station tomorrow. Marilyn sat on the dusty floor behind the counter, long after darkness settled over the mountains. The station was silent, except for the occasional creak of old wood adjusting to the cooling night air. She turned another page, then another, and another. Every entry in Walter Foster's journal followed the same pattern. A name, a problem, a solution. Sometimes it was money, sometimes it was groceries, sometimes it was a repair. Often it was simply someone noticing that a neighbor was struggling. Naomi Fletcher. Transmission failed. Charged for parts only. 3 children. Husband gone. Leon Harper. Furnace out in January. Fixed it after closing. Told him it was a spare part. Patricia Vaughn. Farm payment overdue. Anonymous envelope left in mailbox. Page after page revealed a version of her father Marilyn had never known. Walter had never talked about helping people. He never bragged, never mentioned sacrifices. As far as Marilyn knew, he had spent 40 years pumping gas and repairing engines. But according to these journals, he had quietly become the backbone of an entire valley. Near midnight, she discovered a bundle of letters tied together with faded twine. The first letter came from a family thanking Walter for saving their farm. The second thanked him for paying a medical bill. The third described how his small loan had prevented a young couple from losing their home during a difficult winter. The gratitude was overwhelming, yet none of the letters contained replies. Walter had kept every thank you note, but never answered a single one. He hadn't wanted recognition. He had simply wanted people to survive. Marilyn finally climbed the narrow staircase to the apartment above the station. The small room remained almost untouched. The mattress was old, the furniture worn, the kitchen tiny, but somehow it felt more welcoming than the enormous house she had shared with Gregory. She slept in her clothes. When morning arrived, sunlight spilled through the single window overlooking Highway 47. For a few moments she forgot where she was. Then she remembered the journal, the letters, the hidden compartment. She hurried downstairs, carrying a mug of stale coffee she had managed to make using supplies left in Walter's cabinets. The journal waited where she had left it. Marilyn continued reading. As the entries became more recent, Walter's handwriting grew shakier. The final years of his life unfolded page by page. Business had slowed. The station struggled. Yet Walter never stopped helping people. Then Marilyn found an entry dated 3 years before his death. Her name appeared at the top. She froze. Marilyn called today. The words blurred slightly as tears filled her eyes. She says she's happy. She says everything is fine. But fathers know when daughters are pretending. Marilyn swallowed hard. I can hear the loneliness in her voice. Gregory keeps buying bigger things. Bigger houses, bigger cars, bigger dreams, but none of them seem to make her smile anymore. Her hands trembled. She kept reading. I wish she'd come home. I wish she'd spend one summer at the station again. Maybe then she'd remember who she was before she started becoming who everyone else wanted her to be. Marilyn pressed the journal against her chest. No one had ever said those words to her. Not Gregory. Not Alyssa. Not even herself. Outside, morning sunlight touched the faded sign above the station. For the first time since arriving, Marilyn looked at the building differently. Not as property, not as an asset, not as something to sell, but as something entrusted to her. Then a folded envelope slipped from between the journal pages. Across the front, written in Walter's careful handwriting, were 3 simple words. For Marilyn only. And suddenly, her father's story wasn't finished yet. Marilyn stared at the envelope for several seconds before touching it. The paper had yellowed with age. The corners were worn. Walter's handwriting covered the front in neat block letters. For Marilyn only. Outside, a breeze rattled the leaves in the trees lining Highway 47. Inside, the station seemed to hold its breath. Carefully, she opened the envelope and unfolded the pages inside. The letter began simply, Dear Marilyn, if you're reading this, then you've finally found your way home. Tears immediately blurred her vision. She blinked them away and continued, I've always believed this station would belong to you someday. Not because it's valuable. Truth be told, a real estate developer would probably laugh at it. A sad smile crossed Marilyn's face. Gregory certainly had. The roof leaks. Half the equipment is older than you are. The pumps should have been replaced 10 years ago. but people who measure value by money don't understand places like this. Marilyn read every word carefully. Walter explained that the station had never really been about fuel or repairs. It was about presence, a light in the darkness, a place where people knew someone would answer the door, a place where coffee was always ready, a place where nobody was judged for needing help. Then she reached the final paragraph. Whatever happens, don't let anyone convince you this place is worthless. Some things can't be measured on a balance sheet. And Marilyn, keep the coffee on. That matters more than you think. The letter ended with a single signature. Walter. Marilyn folded the pages slowly. For a long time, she simply sat there, staring through the front window. The mountains stretched into the distance beneath a bright blue sky. For the first time in years, she felt something Gregory had quietly drained from her life. Purpose. A knock on the glass startled her. An older man stood outside holding a paper grocery bag. He wore overalls, work boots, and a faded cap. His weathered face broke into surprise when he saw her. "I'll be damned," he said as she opened the door. "You're Walter's girl." Marilyn blinked. "Calvin Reed?" The old man grinned. "Good memory." Walter's best friend looked older than she remembered, but no less sturdy. He handed her the grocery bag. Inside were fresh eggs, homemade bread, and a jar of honey. "Figured you'd need breakfast." Marilyn felt emotion tighten her throat. "You didn't have to do that." "Sure I did." Calvin stepped inside and looked around the station. For a moment, his eyes lingered on Walter's glasses beside the register. "Looks like he just stepped outside for a minute." The two sat on overturned buckets outside the station drinking coffee. Marilyn told him about the journals, the letters, the hidden compartment. Calvin listened quietly. When she finished, he nodded. "Sounds like Walter." "You knew about all this?" "Not all of it." He stared toward the mountains. "But I knew enough." For the next hour, Calvin told stories. Stories Marilyn had never heard before. Families saved from foreclosure. Single mothers helped through difficult winters. Broken down vehicles repaired without charge. Anonymous grocery deliveries. Medical bills mysteriously paid. Walter had never spoken about any of it, not even to his closest friends. "He always said helping people wasn't special," Calvin said. "He thought it was just what decent folks were supposed to do." As if proving his point, a dusty pickup slowed as it passed the station. The driver spotted Marilyn. He raised 2 fingers from the steering wheel. A mountain greeting. Moments later, another truck passed, then another. Every driver looked toward the station. Every driver noticed. Word was spreading. Walter Foster's daughter had come home. By late afternoon, someone left a casserole on the porch. An hour later, another neighbor dropped off firewood. Before sunset, a teenage boy delivered a box of cleaning supplies and drove away before Marilyn could thank him. No one asked for anything. No one expected anything. They simply came. The same way Walter had gone when they needed him. That night, Marilyn locked the front door and looked around the station. It no longer felt abandoned. It felt like it was waiting for someone to turn the lights back on, waiting for someone to continue what Walter had started. Then, just as the sun disappeared behind the ridge, she heard an engine struggling somewhere up the road. The sound grew louder. A white pickup emerged around the curve, trailing steam from beneath the hood, and it was heading straight toward the station. The white pickup barely made it into the parking lot. Steam billowed from beneath the hood as the engine coughed and rattled. The truck rolled another 20 feet before stopping completely. The driver's door opened. A young man climbed out. He looked no older than 23. His gray t-shirt was stained with grease. His jeans were worn thin at the knees. Work boots covered in dust crunched against the gravel as he walked toward the front of the truck. Without saying a word, he raised the hood. A cloud of steam escaped. Marilyn stepped off the porch. "Radiator hose?" she asked. The young man looked up, surprised. "Upper hose." His eyes moved from her to the station. "I've got a replacement in the truck." "Then what's the problem?" "No tools." Marilyn glanced toward the repair bay. The large garage doors were still closed. For a moment she hesitated. Then she heard Walter's words in her head. "Keep the coffee on. Help where you can." She nodded toward the bay. "Pull it inside if it'll make it." The young man looked uncertain. "I can pay. I didn't ask for money." His expression softened slightly. A few minutes later, the truck sat inside the dusty repair bay. The young man introduced himself as Tyler Mercer. Within minutes, he had removed the damaged hose. Marilyn watched quietly. Tyler worked with speed and confidence. Every movement was efficient. Every tool returned exactly where he found it. Walter would have appreciated that. "You've done this before," Marilyn said. Tyler tightened a clamp. "Most of my life." "Mechanic?" He shrugged. Sometimes that answer told her more than he intended. People with stable jobs didn't answer like that. Neither did people with stable lives. Marilyn opened one of Walter's old storage cabinets. After several minutes, she found a replacement hose that would fit. Tyler examined it and nodded. Perfect. Half an hour later, the truck was running smoothly again. The repair bay filled with the steady hum of a healthy engine. Tyler closed the hood. "Thanks." Marilyn surprised herself with what she said next. "I'm thinking about reopening this place." Tyler looked around. The peeling paint, the dusty shelves, the decades-old equipment. "You serious?" "I think so. You'll need help." "I know." The words came out before she could reconsider. "You looking for work?" Tyler stared at her. Neither spoke for several seconds. Finally, he laughed softly. "You don't even know me. I know you fixed that truck faster than most mechanics." Tyler looked away. The hesitation told Marilyn she had guessed correctly. He was drifting. No permanent job. No permanent place. The kind of person Walter would have noticed immediately. "I'll think about it," Tyler said. "Fair enough." He climbed into his truck. Before leaving, he looked back toward the station. Something unreadable crossed his face. Then he drove away. The following morning, Marilyn began cleaning. The work was endless. Dust covered every surface. Windows needed scrubbing. Vines had climbed halfway up the south wall. By noon, her hands were sore. By evening, she had filled an entire wheelbarrow with weeds. The next morning, Calvin arrived carrying lumber. Without asking permission, he began rebuilding the porch railing. "You know," he said while hammering nails, "Walter always believed this place would come back." Marilyn smiled. "Did he?" "He did." For several days, they worked side by side. Calvin repaired. Marilyn cleaned. The station slowly began looking less abandoned. Then, just after sunrise on the fourth morning, a familiar pickup truck rolled into the lot. Tyler stepped out. He walked toward the porch, carrying a small duffel bag. Marilyn tried not to smile. "Took you long enough." Tyler shrugged. "I said I'd think about it." "And?" He looked at the station. The mountains, the repair bay, the faded sign. Then he held out his hand. "I'll give you a week." Marilyn shook it. "Coffee's inside." Tyler followed her through the front door. Neither of them realized it then, but that simple handshake would change both of their lives. And before the week was over, Marilyn would discover another secret Walter had left behind, one that would make it impossible for her to ever walk away from Foster Ridge Service Station. Tyler's week turned into 2, then 3. Neither he nor Marilyn ever mentioned leaving. Each morning began the same way. Marilyn unlocked the front door before sunrise. She brewed coffee in the old machine she had cleaned and repaired. Tyler arrived moments later, carrying a mug into the repair bay before disappearing beneath the hood of whatever vehicle happened to be waiting. The station slowly came back to life. Fresh paint covered the front door. The porch railing, Calvin rebuilt, gleamed in the morning sunlight. The cracked windows had been replaced. The weeds were gone. Even the faded sign above the building looked proud again. One afternoon, while organizing shelves behind the counter, Marilyn discovered another envelope hidden inside one of Walter's old accounting books. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. Marilyn smiled. Apparently, her father still wasn't finished talking. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of folded paper. "Marilyn, if you've made it this far, then you've probably decided not to sell." "Good." Some places don't survive because they're profitable. They survive because somebody refuses to quit on them. You're stronger than you think. Always were. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. And remember, every person who walks through that door is carrying something you can't see. Be kind first. Ask questions second. Love, Dad. Marilyn folded the letter slowly. Her eyes drifted toward the front window. Walter had known her better than she knew herself. For years, Gregory had treated her kindness as weakness. Walter had always seen it as strength. 3 days later, the first customer arrived. An elderly woman in a white sedan pulled beside one of the newly serviced pumps. She rolled down her window and stared. "Is this place actually open?" Marilyn laughed. "It is." The woman climbed out of the car. Her eyes filled with tears. "I used to stop here every week." "You knew Walter?" "Knew him," she said. "Your father kept my car running for 15 years." Marilyn filled the tank. Then she checked the tire pressure. When the woman offered extra money for the tire check, Marilyn waved it away. The woman smiled. "Your father used to do that too." Word spread quickly. Within days, more customers appeared. Some needed gas. Others needed repairs. Many came simply to see whether the rumors were true. Every visitor had a Walter Foster story. One man recalled Walter repairing his truck on Christmas Eve. Another remembered an anonymous loan during a difficult winter. A retired teacher brought photographs of school fundraisers Walter had quietly sponsored. The stories never stopped. Neither did the customers. The coffee table near the front door became the unofficial center of the station. People stayed long after filling their tanks. They drank coffee, shared news, helped one another, exactly as Walter once had. Meanwhile, Tyler transformed the repair bay. Engines that other shops refused to touch left running perfectly. Customers noticed. More importantly, they trusted him. One afternoon, Marilyn found him teaching a teenage boy how to change brake pads. The patience in his voice reminded her so much of Walter that she had to turn away for a moment. By the end of the month, Foster Ridge Service Station was earning enough money to pay its bills. Not much more, but enough. For the first time since her divorce, Marilyn wasn't surviving. She was building something. Then the letter arrived. A thick, white envelope. Professional. Expensive. Dangerous. The return address made her stomach tighten immediately. Cross and Associates. Gregory's attorneys. Marilyn carried the envelope behind the counter. Tyler looked up from a work order. "Everything okay?" She didn't answer. Instead, she opened the envelope and unfolded the legal documents inside. The words struck like a punch. Petition to reopen property division. Claim of undisclosed asset value. Request for financial reassessment. Gregory was coming after the station. The one thing he had once called worthless. The one thing Marilyn had finally begun to call home. Outside, customers laughed on the porch. Inside, Marilyn stared at the papers, and for the first time since arriving in Pinecrest County, fear returned. Because this fight wasn't about money anymore. It was about whether Foster Ridge Service Station would survive long enough to fulfill the purpose Walter had left behind. Marilyn read the legal documents 3 times. The words never changed. Gregory Hale was asking the court to reopen the divorce settlement. His attorneys claimed Foster Ridge Service Station had been significantly undervalued during the original proceedings. A proposed highway expansion, they argued, could dramatically increase the property's future worth. Therefore, Gregory deserved a share or a forced sale. Marilyn set the papers down beside Walter's reading glasses. For a long moment, she simply stared through the front window. The station buzzed with life. A customer laughed on the porch. Tyler rolled a toolbox across the repair bay. The coffee pot gurgled quietly. Everything she had rebuilt suddenly felt fragile. Tyler appeared beside the counter. "You look like somebody just died." Marilyn handed him the papers. He read silently. His jaw tightened. "He's serious." Unfortunately, Tyler placed the documents back on the counter. "What are you going to do?" Marilyn laughed softly. There wasn't much humor in it. "I have exactly $600 in the business account and less than $200 in my personal account." That wasn't my question. She looked at him. Tyler's expression remained calm, steady, the same way it always was when an engine refused to start. "I'm not giving him the station." "Good." The certainty in his voice surprised her. For the first time since the letter arrived, Marilyn felt a small piece of her fear loosen. 3 days later, her daughter called. Alyssa Hale rarely called without a reason. Marilyn already knew what that reason was. "Mom." "Alyssa." There was a pause. "I heard from Dad." Of course she had. Gregory never entered a battle without preparing the ground first. "He says the property is worth more than anyone realized." Marilyn leaned against the counter. "He would say that." "Mom, maybe he's right." The words stung more than she expected. Alyssa continued. "If the land is valuable, maybe you should sell it." Marilyn closed her eyes. There had been a time when she would have agreed. A time when keeping peace mattered more than speaking truth. That woman no longer lived here. "I'm not selling." "Why?" The question hung between them. Because how could she explain? How could she describe Walter's journals? The people who arrived every day with stories. The community rebuilding itself around a forgotten station. How could she explain that some things mattered because they couldn't be measured? Finally, she answered, "Because this place isn't property anymore." Alyssa sighed. "Mom, I just don't want to see you hurt again." "I know." The conversation ended politely. Neither convinced the other. 3 days later, Gregory arrived. His black SUV rolled into the parking lot shortly before noon. Every conversation on the porch stopped. Tyler looked up from the repair bay. Marilyn stepped outside. Gregory emerged wearing sunglasses, an expensive watch, and the confidence of a man accustomed to winning. He studied the station, the fresh paint, the repaired porch, the steady flow of customers. His expression changed. For the first time, he saw value. "Looks different," he said. "It is." Gregory removed his sunglasses. "You've done a lot with the place." Marilyn folded her arms. "You didn't drive 4 hours to compliment me." "No." He looked around again. "The property is worth something now." Marilyn almost laughed. There it was, the difference between them. Gregory saw land, buildings, numbers, potential profit. Walter had seen people, community, belonging, purpose. "You already got the house," Marilyn said. "The savings, the investments, everything. I want what's fair." Fair. Gregory always loved that word. It sounded reasonable until someone looked closely. Marilyn met his eyes. "This station belonged to my father. It belongs to the court now." For a moment, neither spoke. Then, Marilyn remembered Walter's final letter. "Keep the coffee on. Don't let anyone tell you this place is worthless." She straightened her shoulders. "You're wrong, Gregory." His eyebrows lifted. "About what?" "About value." The mountain breeze stirred the trees behind the station. Customers watched quietly from the porch. Tyler stood in the repair bay doorway. Marilyn took a deep breath. Then she said the words she should have spoken years ago. "You're right. This place is worth something." Gregory smiled, victory appearing too early in his eyes. Then Marilyn finished. "Just not the kind of something you'll ever understand." The smile disappeared, and for the first time since their divorce, Gregory looked uncertain. As he climbed back into his SUV and drove away, Marilyn watched the dust settle behind him. But deep inside, she knew something else was coming. Because Gregory Hale had never accepted defeat gracefully. And somewhere in the valley, there had to be someone who remembered what Walter Foster had done. Someone who might help protect what he left behind. Someone who owed Walter a debt that money could never repay. The morning after Gregory's visit, Marilyn found Calvin sitting on the porch before sunrise. A mug of coffee rested beside him. He stared at the mountains as fog drifted through the valley below. Marilyn carried 2 fresh cups outside and handed him one. "Couldn't sleep?" Calvin asked. Marilyn sat beside him. "Not much." He nodded. "Thought so." For a while, they watched the sun slowly brighten the ridges. Finally, Marilyn told him everything. The lawsuit, the highway expansion claim, the possibility of losing the station. Calvin listened without interrupting. When she finished, he remained silent for several moments. Then he set his coffee down. "There might be somebody who can help." Marilyn looked at him. "A lawyer?" "A retired one." Calvin smiled faintly. "Name's Eleanor Whitaker. Used to be one of the best property attorneys in the state." "What makes you think she'd help me?" Calvin's expression softened. "Because 25 years ago, her little girl needed surgery." Marilyn waited. The insurance company wouldn't cover it. Eleanor was drowning in debt. Nobody knew what she was going to do. He looked toward the station. "Walter paid for the operation." Marilyn blinked. "He what?" $3,000. Her eyes widened. For Walter, that would have been a fortune. "He never told anybody." Calvin shrugged. "That's how Walter operated." The same afternoon, Calvin made a phone call. The next morning, a gray sedan pulled into the station lot. A tall woman stepped out. Her silver hair was neatly pinned back. A leather briefcase hung from one shoulder. Confidence seemed to follow her like a shadow. "You must be Marilyn Foster." "I am." The woman extended her hand. Eleanor Whitaker. Her grip was firm, professional, the kind that instantly inspired confidence. They spent 2 hours at the counter reviewing documents. Eleanor examined every page Gregory's attorneys had sent. She read slowly, carefully, twice. Finally, she removed her glasses. "This case is weak." Marilyn almost laughed with relief. "Weak?" "Very." Eleanor tapped the paperwork. The station was inherited property. It was. It remained solely in your name. Yes, no marital funds improved it. No. Then Gregory doesn't have a claim. The words sounded too good to believe. You mean we'll win? Eleanor smiled. I mean, Gregory's lawyers are hoping you can't afford to fight. Marilyn glanced around the station. They're not entirely wrong. Eleanor closed her briefcase. Fortunately, your father already paid my fee. Marilyn's eyes filled unexpectedly. That surgery? Eleanor nodded. My daughter is alive because of Walter Foster. She stood. This is the easiest case I've accepted in years. For the first time since the lawsuit began, Marilyn felt hope. Real hope. That afternoon, Tyler was organizing old records in the repair bay. Walter's green filing cabinet stood open beside him. Folders covered the workbench. Names, dates, handwritten notes, decades of lives carefully documented. Then, everything went quiet. Too quiet. Marilyn looked up from the counter. Tyler wasn't moving. She walked into the bay. He sat on a milk crate staring at a folder. His hands trembled slightly. Tyler? He looked up. His face had gone pale. Without speaking, he handed her the file. The name on the tab read, Mercer. Marilyn opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Walter's handwriting covered the page. Anonymous payment made through Regional Hospital. Heart valve replacement surgery for Evelyn Mercer. August 1994. Family not to be informed. Marilyn slowly looked up. Evelyn? Tyler swallowed hard. My grandmother. Neither spoke. The garage seemed impossibly quiet. Tyler stared at the paper. She told me that story my whole life. His voice cracked. Said some stranger paid for her surgery. Marilyn sat beside him. Tyler shook his head. Without that operation, she would have died. His eyes drifted toward Walter's tools hanging neatly on the wall. My mother would have never been born. The realization settled heavily between them. Every road in Tyler's life led back to that single decision. A stranger helping someone he'd never meet. Tyler carefully returned the file to the folder. Then he stood. For a long moment, he looked around the repair bay. At the tools, the workbench, the station, the life Walter had built. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady. I'm not going anywhere. Marilyn smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. Outside, evening sunlight stretched across the parking lot. Inside, something larger than a legal battle was becoming clear. Walter's kindness wasn't history. It was still working, still growing, still changing lives. And in 6 weeks, when the court hearing arrived, Gregory Hale would discover that some investments become more valuable with time, especially the ones made in people. The hearing took place on a Wednesday morning, 6 weeks after Gregory Hale filed his motion. 6 weeks of waiting. 6 weeks of wondering whether everything Marilyn had rebuilt could be taken away again. She drove to the county courthouse in the same rusted pickup truck that had carried her away from her divorce. The truck rattled as it climbed the final hill toward town. Marilyn gripped the steering wheel and stared at the courthouse. The building looked exactly the same, but she didn't. The woman who had walked out of those doors months ago had been exhausted, defeated, afraid. The woman climbing out of the pickup now was something different. Not stronger because life had become easier, stronger because she had finally remembered who she was. Eleanor Whitaker met her on the courthouse steps. She carried a slim leather folder beneath one arm. Ready? She asked. Marilyn nodded. As I'll ever be. Inside, the courtroom was smaller than she expected. A handful of people occupied the benches. Gregory sat near the front beside his attorney. His suit was expensive, his expression confident. When he saw Marilyn enter, his eyes briefly narrowed, as if he still couldn't quite understand how she had gotten this far. Eleanor took a seat beside Marilyn. Then the hearing began. Gregory's attorney stood first. He spoke about future land value, proposed highway development, potential appreciation, missed opportunities, financial fairness. The words filled the room, but somehow they sounded hollow. When he finished, Eleanor stood. She opened her folder and quietly dismantled the entire argument. The original deed, Walter Foster's will, property records, tax records. Every document told the same story. The station had belonged to Walter. Walter had left it solely to Marilyn. The property had never been jointly owned. Gregory had never invested a dollar into it, never improved it, never maintained it, never even visited it until recently. The facts were simple, and facts were difficult to argue with. The judge reviewed the paperwork. He asked a few questions. Then he turned toward Gregory's attorney. Do you have evidence this property was concealed during the original settlement? No, Your Honor. Do you have evidence it became marital property? No, Your Honor. The judge nodded. Then he looked down at the file one final time. The silence stretched. Marilyn held her breath. Finally, the judge spoke. Motion denied. The words landed like a door closing. This property was inherited before dissolution and remained separate throughout the marriage. He set the file aside. The matter is closed. Just like that, it was over. Gregory sat motionless. His attorney slowly gathered his papers. Across the room, Eleanor smiled. Not a triumphant smile, just the satisfied expression of someone who had watched the truth win. Outside, the afternoon sun warmed the courthouse steps. Marilyn stood beside her truck. The mountain air felt lighter somehow, as though she had been carrying a weight she could finally set down. Footsteps approached behind her. She turned. Gregory stood at the bottom of the stairs. For the first time in years, he looked tired, not physically, spiritually, like a man realizing something important too late. When did you become this person? He asked quietly. Marilyn studied him. The man she had loved, the man she had followed. The man who had spent decades measuring success in houses, investments, and account balances. Then she smiled. A calm, peaceful smile. I always was. Gregory frowned. Marilyn opened the truck door. You just never bothered to look. She climbed inside and drove away. For the first time in months, she wasn't driving toward uncertainty. She was driving home. The sun was low and Foster Ridge service station appeared around the curve. Tyler was closing the repair bay. Customers lingered on the porch drinking coffee. Calvin sat in his usual chair watching the sunset. Everyone looked up as Marilyn parked. No one asked questions. They simply read the answer on her face. Calvin smiled first. Then Tyler. The entire porch seemed to relax. Marilyn walked inside. The station was quiet, warm, familiar. She stopped beside the breaker panel Walter had installed years ago. Every switch remained labeled in his careful handwriting. One label caught her eye. Sign. Slowly, Marilyn flipped the switch. Outside, a soft glow appeared. Tyler stepped into the doorway. Calvin rose from his chair. The faded hand-painted sign illuminated the parking lot for the first time in over a decade. Foster Ridge Service Station. The letters weren't perfect. The paint had faded. The wood was weathered, but the light was on. Walter's station was alive again. Marilyn stood beneath the glowing sign and looked up into the evening sky. The fight was over. The future was beginning. And somewhere beyond the mountains, spring was already on its way. Spring arrived in Pinecrest County slowly. Then all at once, dogwood trees burst into bloom along Highway 47. Wildflowers appeared beside the road. The mountain air lost its winter edge and carried the scent of fresh earth and growing things. Foster Ridge Service Station changed with the season. The parking lot stayed busy. The pumps ran steadily throughout the day. Vehicles lined up outside the repair bay waiting for Tyler's attention. People who could easily visit newer garages 20 miles away chose to drive to the station instead. Not because it was convenient, because they trusted it. Walter Foster's name still meant something in the valley, and Marilyn was beginning to understand exactly how much. One morning, she arrived downstairs to find Tyler already working. The repair bay doors were open. A laptop sat on the workbench beside a stack of notebooks. Marilyn raised an eyebrow. What's all this? Tyler looked up from the screen. Certification classes. You going back to school? Online. A small smile appeared. Thought it was time. Marilyn nodded approvingly. Walter would have liked that. Tyler had changed over the past few months. Not dramatically, not in ways most people would notice. But the uncertainty that had once followed him everywhere was gone. He walked differently now. Spoke differently. The station had given him something he hadn't possessed before. A future. One afternoon, Marilyn found him teaching a nervous teenage girl how to change her oil, patiently, carefully, explaining every step. The scene reminded her so much of Walter that she had to look away for a moment. The valley itself seemed to be gathering around the station. Every afternoon, lawn chairs appeared on the porch. Someone left a checkerboard near the entrance. No one knew who started it. Within days, regular games began. Retired farmers, truck drivers, teachers, mechanics, everybody played. Nobody admitted how seriously they took winning. The coffee pot remained on from sunrise until closing. just as Walter had instructed. People came for gas and stayed for conversation. Sometimes they stayed for help. Marilyn paid attention, the same way Walter once had. She noticed when an elderly man's truck needed brakes he couldn't afford. She noticed when a young family looked worried about money. She noticed when a widow sat quietly drinking coffee longer than necessary because she didn't want to return to an empty house. Whenever possible, she helped, quietly, without making a show of it. One evening, a woman found an envelope tucked inside her grocery bag. Another discovered her repair bill had mysteriously shrunk. Nobody asked questions. The Valley simply accepted these things the way it had accepted Walter's kindness for decades. Then, in early May, Alyssa arrived. This time, she didn't come alone. 2 children climbed out of the rental car behind her. A boy, around 9. A girl, perhaps 6. Both stared at the station with wide-eyed curiosity. Marilyn hurried outside. Her granddaughter ran straight into her arms. The boy followed more cautiously. "This is where Great-Grandpa Walter worked?" he asked. Marilyn smiled. "This is the place." She spent the afternoon showing them everything. Walter's reading glasses, the old cash register, the journals, the repair bay. Tyler patiently demonstrated how a hydraulic lift worked. The children were fascinated. When the boy successfully checked tire pressure for the first time, he grinned proudly. Marilyn felt something tighten in her chest. The same pride Walter must have felt when teaching her. Later that evening, after the children had fallen asleep upstairs, Alyssa joined her mother on the porch. The mountains glowed beneath a sky full of stars. Neither spoke for a while. The silence felt comfortable, different from before. Finally, Alyssa broke it. "I was wrong." Marilyn turned toward her daughter. Alyssa stared out at the valley. "About this place." She paused. "About you." The words hung softly between them. Months earlier, Alyssa had believed her father. She had believed success looked like Gregory's world. The house, the money, the status. Now she wasn't so sure. "I thought you were running away," Alyssa admitted. Marilyn smiled gently. "And now?" Alyssa looked toward the station, the porch, the bay, the glowing sign, the community gathered around it. "Now I think you found something." Marilyn reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand. Above them, the stars filled the sky. Below them, Foster Ridge Service Station glowed warmly in the darkness. And neither woman noticed that another chapter of Walter Foster's legacy was about to begin. Because the very next afternoon, a dusty minivan carrying a desperate young mother and 3 children would pull into the station. And the choice Marilyn made would prove just how much she had become her father's daughter. The minivan arrived late in the afternoon. Dust coated its sides, and one taillight flickered weakly as it turned into Foster Ridge Service Station. Inside were 3 children, one of them asleep in a car seat. The mother looked exhausted in a way that went deeper than lack of sleep. She hesitated before stepping out, as if she was deciding whether she was allowed to ask for help. Marilyn noticed immediately. She had learned to see that look, the same look she once wore herself. "Can I get some gas?" the woman asked carefully. "Of course," Marilyn replied. She filled the tank without comment. While the pump clicked steadily, she checked the oil. The level was low. She topped it off. One tire was soft. She aired it up. The woman watched every movement, confusion and relief mixing on her face. When Marilyn finished, the woman opened her purse. Her fingers trembled as she counted what little she had. "I'll pay next week," she whispered. Marilyn shook her head. "Pay it next time you pass through." The woman froze. "I can't just take—" "You can," Marilyn said gently. "You're not taking. You're moving forward." The woman's eyes filled. She looked away quickly, embarrassed by her own tears. "Why would you do that?" Marilyn paused. For a moment, she saw her father standing beside her instead of Tyler, instead of the station, instead of the valley. She heard Walter's voice as clearly as if he were still alive. "Keep the coffee on. Help first. Ask questions later." "My father used to say the same thing," Marilyn said softly. The woman nodded, as if that explained everything and nothing at the same time. When she drove away, the station was quiet again. But something had shifted, not inside the building, inside Marilyn. That evening, Calvin arrived with fresh firewood. Tyler closed the repair bay later than usual. A family played cards on the porch until dark. Life continued exactly as it had been building for months. But Marilyn felt it more clearly now. This wasn't just survival. It was continuity, a living thing. A system of kindness that moved from person to person like a quiet current beneath the valley. Later, Marilyn stood alone behind the counter. She looked at Walter's reading glasses, the unfinished crossword, the journal filled with names of strangers who had once needed help, and she finally understood something she had missed for years. Her father had not built a gas station. He had built a place where people could stay human. The next morning, Alyssa returned with her children again. This time, she didn't bring doubt. She brought curiosity. She watched Tyler patiently teach her son how to check engine oil. She watched her daughter laugh while ringing up imaginary customers at the old cash register. And she watched her mother move through the station like she belonged there completely. That evening, after the children fell asleep upstairs, Alyssa stayed on the porch longer than before. "I get it now," she said quietly. Marilyn didn't ask what she meant. She didn't need to. Alyssa continued, her voice softer. "You didn't come back here because you had nowhere else to go." She looked at the glowing sign. "You came back because this is where you were supposed to be." Marilyn nodded. For the first time, she didn't feel the need to defend it. Weeks passed, then months. Foster Ridge Service Station became something people depended on again. Tyler earned his certification and stayed anyway. Calvin stopped by so often that no one remembered a time he didn't. Alyssa and her children visited regularly. The valley changed. Slowly, in small ways. No one spoke about it. It simply happened. One evening, Marilyn stood at the edge of the porch, watching the sun disappear behind the mountains. Tyler locked the bay doors. Calvin stacked chairs. The coffee pot clicked off. The station lights glowed softly in the dark. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't wealthy. It wasn't impressive in any way Gregory would have understood. But it was alive. And it was enough. Marilyn walked back inside and picked up Walter's reading glasses one final time. She cleaned them gently, set them beside the unfinished crossword. 27 across was still filled in. 28 across was still blank. She left it that way, because some things, she realized, were not meant to be finished. They were meant to continue. She locked the door, looked one last time at the glowing sign. Foster Ridge Service Station. Then she turned off the light and went upstairs to a life that no longer felt like recovery. It felt like purpose. At 58 years old, Marilyn Foster had lost everything she once believed defined her. And in a forgotten gas station on a mountain road, she found something far more enduring. A place where kindness still worked. A place where people still mattered. A place where her father's voice never really left. She was 58 years old, and she was just getting started.